Okay, this is my informative speech for my interpersonal communications class. This is my audience of two. Let's start the speech. As U.S. citizens, we have access to the most advanced health care in the world, but drug shortages have become commonplace. Why is it happening, and what are the effects that they are having on the health care, and what is being done to correct the problem? In this presentation, I will provide a brief history of drug shortages, discuss their causes and the impact on health care, and what is being done to help this problem. Drug shortages are not a new problem. Steroids and influenza vaccine were in shortage in the 1990s. But what has changed? The extent, duration, and type of drug shortages have changed. We are seeing more and longer drug shortages. We have a dramatic rise in drug shortages in the last decade, as shown by this chart. In 1950 or in 2004, there were 58 new reported drug shortages. This rose to 267 by 2011. 117 new drug shortages were reported in 2012, but they did not include the drug shortages that were continuing from the previous years. A variety of drugs have been affected: cancer drugs, anesthesia drugs, emergency drugs, electrolytes, antibiotics, pain control drugs, all causing problems in healthcare. And what's causing these shortages? This is a chart listing some of the reasons of these shortages. This is from a couple of years ago, but it's still relevant at this time. There's a number of combination of issues that are affecting us. Some are totally unknown, and that's a great majority of them. Raw materials are the first link in the drug shortage chain. One supplier for many different wholesalers and manufacturers, and 80% of our raw materials are sourced from abroad. These countries can be affected by political unrest and trade agreements. There are also manufacturing issues. FDA approval is a long and costly process. Voluntary and mandated recalls, and some manufacturers need to redirect their lines to produce critically needed drugs and cause shortages in other drugs that are alleviating those lines. These manufacturers may also make business and economic decisions that affect our drug shortages. Manufacturers are only required to give 6 months notice when the drug being discontinued is a single source, medically necessary product. That's a very vague definition, and there's no substantial penalty for non-reporting. Few manufacturers are out there in the market making these drugs, so if one manufacturer discontinues or has problems or has a recall with their drug, it puts increased pressure on the other manufacturers, who may not be able to keep up with the demand. Stockpiling and hoarding by purchasing organizations, wholesalers, and healthcare facilities contribute to the shortage. Oftentimes these are by rumor of a shortage or anticipation of a shortage. There are increased regulatory factors. The FDA has more oversight but very limited resources. Their unapproved drug initiative requires older drugs introduced before 1938 to obtain and reapply for new drug approval. This is a costly process, and many manufacturers may choose to discontinue the drug instead of pursuing this approval. The DEA controlled substance quota system also contributes to the shortage. It limits the amount of controlled substance that one manufacturer can produce, irregardless of the demand for that product. Supply and demand plays a part in the drug shortages. Oftentimes there are new guidelines for use. This causes increased demand for the drug. This has happened with some of the vaccines. And disease outbreak, or even the anticipation of a disease outbreak, can cause a shortage in the drugs. So how are drug shortages impacting health care? It often necessitates alternative therapy, which is not always the optimal therapy. There's increased risk for drug errors in dosing and timing of the drugs. The Institute for Safe Medical Practices found in their 2010 survey that of 1,800 providers, that over 1,000 near misses, errors, and adverse patient outcomes, and even 2 deaths were recorded. This creates use of alternative drugs also creates another shortage of the alternative drug. There's often a delay or omission of care, while patients wait for drugs to be available or do not receive therapy because the drug never becomes available. Many times they will need to be diverted to an alternate facility for care to receive the needed medication. Substandard drugs are a concern. Due to receiving these medications from an alternative source, including compounding facilities, in-house pharmacies, and gray market providers, concerns regarding sterility, short dating, and cost have arisen. A good example of this is a New England compounding company who was responsible for the meningitis outbreak earlier this year. Increased costs to the facilities and to the consumer. Generic drugs are cheaper than brand, but when the generic drugs aren't available, name brand drugs must be used. The secondary gray market wholesalers can charge up to 650% more for a product than the regular wholesaler and often only have a limited supply. So you have the drug for a short time, but not enough to complete your course of treatment. New products come at an increased cost. And an increased staff time to deal in acquiring these drugs. Pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, and other providers spend a lot of time trying to acquire the drugs or find alternatives for these drugs. And the increased cost of care for extended treatment and adverse outcomes because the drugs that are needed are not available. What are we doing to lessen shortages and their impact on healthcare? In November 2010, a drug shortage summit was held. This was attended by a number of health provider organizations. The goal was to define scope, causes, and potential patient harm from shortages. They came up with 21 recommendations to improve communication and remove barriers faced by the FDA and drug manufacturers. These recommendations led to the House Bill 2245 and Senate Bill 296 in 2011. They were called Preserving Access to Life-Saving Medications Act. It was two pieces. The most important was to require manufacturers to notify the FDA for planned discontinuation or interruption, provide substantial penalties for failure to notify, and identify the drugs vulnerable for shortage. These bills were sent to committee. There has been no action, and at this point they have died in committee. President Obama issued an executive order on October 31st, 2011 to address the drug shortage. FDA to broaden and expedite the regulatory process to get the new drugs out there faster, increased resources for the FDA's drug shortage program, and the FDA and Department of Justice to investigate price gouging and stockpiling. This FDA strategic plan and proposed rule of October 31st, 2011 came from this executive order. This strategic plan mandates that it would require manufacturers of prescription drugs that are life-supporting, life-sustaining, or intended for treatment or prevention of a debilitating condition to notify the FDA of plans to discontinue that drug. It would also require FDA notification of manufacturing interruptions, if likely to lead to a shortage, and require a reason for discontinuation or the interruption. As healthcare providers, we can lessen the impact of drug shortages by doing a couple of things: utilizing responsible inventory practices, developing protocols for use of alternate drugs, and providing education in their use, prioritizing our patients and exploring alternate treatments, and working with other facilities to provide meds for those in greatest need. Most importantly, we need to stay informed of the current shortages and have plans in place to deal with them. Drug shortages are a continuing reality and problem in healthcare with profound effects on the delivery of quality healthcare. It is imperative that our strategies and legislation be developed to lessen the frequency and impact of these shortages. Thank you.